Welcome. Every time I play a game that's part of a wider game system, I often rush looking at the game-specific rules, but this time I'm going to create for myself an Aide memoir because I'm going to be playing Last Blitzkrieg from the Battalion Combat Series tomorrow. So let's have a little look at the little nuances that the game-specific rules and try and extract some of the wider implications. First of all, the weather. I mean, obviously the weather's nasty. It's the Battle of the Bulge. It's just before Christmas. The system here is interlinked. So ground influences atmosphere, which influences visibility. The ground itself is influenced by the turn before weather. You roll a 1d6. On the 16th and 17th, it's set to normal to give the Germans a chance. But then you take the previous conditions, and that determines what the next ones are going to be like. Bad results include mud and freeze. Mud halves truck movement. Freeze takes one off from TAC-MA in open and rolling and trucks in rolling only. The implication of this is that mud really only happens before December the 23rd. Before the Americans get their major reinforcements. So it's primarily going to impact the Germans who are needing to rush around everywhere. Freeze will occur primarily after December the 23rd, and that will help the Allies because it will make movement a little bit easier. The atmospherics depend on what this turn's ground will be, and will determine the air points that you get, particularly after the 23rd. That's because the best air comes when the weather is good, or the atmosphere is good, and the atmosphere is good primarily when it's been freezing. Then finally, visibility depends in turn on the atmospherics and will determine your engagement range, engagement zones. Bridges are crucially important. The Germans build bridges by an abstracted mechanism. Most, something like 12 bridges, aren't open at the very beginning of the game on the 16th of December, and they gradually become open, and that's kind of it. The Allies get to blow up bridges which have a plunger marker set against them. If there's no Greif team, we often call it Grief because it looks so similar, but it's actually Greif, then they will blow on a 3 to 6, so 2/3 chance. If there is a Greif team, then it becomes the other way round. There's a 2/3 chance that it won't be blown. Plus, there's a special Greif rule that can save a bridge, but more of that later. Supply is limited to the various supply sources. They're pretty obvious. They're, on the map edge. Buddies, so Piper and the 1st SS, and the parachute unit with anybody. For the Allies, the 2nd and 99th Infantry, and of course all the regiments of the 28th Infantry, but crucially, all the combat commands of all the armoured divisions are buddies with anybody, which means they can pass through and counterattack the Germans through the formation. You don't have to kind of worry about trying to take a different route past. And then finally, victory hexes can block MSR. The victory hex must be controlled by you for an MSR to go through it. Terrain, most importantly, I mean, there's terrain everywhere in the game, but specific to the game is the West Wall. So for the Allies, you have to stop and there's no combat bonus. And for the Germans, it's the reverse. There's no movement penalty, but you do get terrain, and they are peak terrain. And then the Meuse River is the only major river in the game. All the other rivers are just normal. Special rules. The Germans get these 5 Greif teams. You can use them to do that -2 and on a snafu roll for a formation, or effectively a +2 for a bridge, as we've discussed. The -2 for a snafu, I think, is really interesting because if you can resist the temptation to blow all your Greif teams on preventing bridges, because bridges are so important, then having one of those in your back pocket for when you're very exposed and suddenly an allied formation pops up and is about to compromise one of your positions, then adding a -2 to the snafu table, it can be hugely beneficial if it comes off. You can use 2 Greif teams to save a bridge, so there's no roll, but obviously that's quite expensive. The parachute unit can be placed anywhere within this hex, behind allied lines, and as the rules say, pretty much good luck with that. Should it survive, it then can mingle with anybody, and you can use it for anything, whatever that might be. And there are these VOR units in the 12th, 18th and 26th Volksgrenadier divisions that are also recon units, as well as the classically recon units with the normal symbol. Special movement, so rubber boats on the first turn for Leg MA units across the Ur and the Sauer, but it's not only the first turn, it's the first activation, the initial activation of the first turn. There's no penalty, they effectively don't exist. Any 12 movement point unit is -4 on the 16th on both activations, so this is to simulate traffic jams and stuff like that, so they're not quite as mobile as you'd hope. And of course, the first activation on the 16th is German. Special reinforcements, you get 2 numbers for the AV, the non-Tiger and the Tiger. If you haven't got any Tigers to repair, then you can use that for non-Tigers. And then Tiger unreliability, evil is a rule that applies to all the variations of Tigers. Whenever they're activated, including in support, you roll 1 dice, and if you get a 1, they lose 1 step loss. Allied special rules. Principal, or most important, is this air supply. Where a formation's combat train isn't in a legal hex, you can use an air point to remove blocked MSR marker and its consequence negative snafu. And if you add additional air points, that can add a positive snafu should you need or wish. This is really useful in the first week when you don't get many allied air points, but the 1 or 2 or 3 that you get can be used in this air supply to keep your formations from being seriously hampered by being cut out of supply. Special units, whether it's the static units that don't move, don't assign, don't do prep def, don't get support, don't attack. Effectively, they're unprepared, but they do get terrain benefit as if they were infantry. And then US, but not Commonwealth artillery, gets to attack on the barrage table with 2 artillery points, if you wish, rather than the usual 1 limit. At the start, on the 16th, several units are out of command, and they will therefore suffer isolation effects. Several of the at-start formations are used or done, and you can't assign units or artillery on the 16th and 17th, first 2 days. Optional rules, called salt and pepper for some reason in the game-specific rules. For the Allies, you can choose, with agreement, to be more flexible where you put the 82nd and the 101st. You can insist that the Germans are a bit more rigid in how they play, ensuring that the 1st, 2nd, 9th and 12th SS stay north of the Rollbahn E hex line. I really had to peer at the map quite hard to spot the Rollbahn hex line. Look at the key for terrain on the map, and near the bottom it will show you what the Rollbahns are, and E will then become visible near the north. Equally, the 2nd Layer and 116th Panzers have to stay south of the 58th hex line for the Rollbahn. This is lifted on the 2nd, so after 4 days. We are going to be playing this one. Full no surprise, so you can have the US formations on the 16th start completely unused and activate normally, or you can do it partially where they're completely unused and may activate normally but have no second activation. So just how much leeway you want to give the Americans. You can also have this no echelons, where the first SS, Piper, 12th SS, 116th starts unused on the 16th of December. SS forward deployed pulls back to the Volksgrenadier divisions and sets up the Piper and the SS in the front. So the 12th and the 217th get to be pulled back. The American 30th Infantry Division can be fixed to guard the town of Spa, because that was a major headquarters with all the logistics and command and control facilities around it. And then finally, in the kind of opposite to the rigid Germans, you can make the 5th US Corps rigid, with the 1st, 2nd, 9th and 30th and the 99th Infantry Divisions all staying in prepared defence, except for the first turn on which any of them appear, and that's lifted on the 25th. So we're playing with the rigid 5th Corps to keep kind of limit on the ahistorical use of the 5th Corps in the north to counterattack, and we're doing the rigid Germans to fix them into their more historical lines of advance. Victory, finally. So sudden death. You have to exit as the Germans M or N with the 2nd and 9th SS with at least 8 units under command at the start of the unit's activation. So you can't go crazy with the 2nd or 9th SS if you want to get them off, or there's a chance of getting them off. And you may need to prioritize them for replacements to make sure that they have this 8-unit criteria. If that doesn't happen, and it really shouldn't, then it's a straightforward victory count. The Germans have 20 victory hexes and the Allies 15 under their control at the start, but it's a simple majority of who has more. The control just requires any unit to, if it's in command radius with a good MSR, to be able to put an objective marker on the hex, even if the hex is empty. Of course, oft times with BCS games, you just look at it and you kind of know who's been victorious. And those are the game-specific rules with which we will honor this fabulous game of this great and terrible battle. I hope that'll be useful to you. I'm sure my future self will be glad that I did this. Bye for now and stay safe.